Welcome to another audio article from Max's English Corner. I'm Max Neil Maximchuk, and in this article, I'd like to share with you some goals and advice you might want to consider when teaching grammar, and even in your teaching in general. In this article, we're going to look at some ideas on how you might approach teaching grammar. The focus isn't on why we are teaching grammar, but on what a teacher can do to more effectively reach the students and help them along in their understanding and use of the language. Some of those ideas are concrete practical suggestions you could use when looking for or deciding on activities, and some ideas are bigger picture ones to help provide context and direction. What is grammar is perhaps the first question we could ask. It's what holds the sentence together and shows relationships to different ideas in accepted ways of that language. We can communicate without good grammar, throwing out different words, vocabulary, but we are much more limited in what we can say and what we can understand. When we teach grammar, we are showing how the different parts of speech function, so we are able to reach a good understanding when we want to communicate certain things. Maybe the way to make comparatives in one language is different than another, but often different languages share similar concepts, such as the existence of comparative forms. Just that the way to construct a comparative follows a different set formula, and learners have to become accustomed to those ways. It is not only knowing a new and different way of constructing a particular concept, but also understanding what that concept really is, and knowing when to appropriately apply it. Much confusion comes to learners of a new language when trying to understand verb tenses, for example. The ideas of present perfect and the past simple probably exist in the learner's maternal language, but when to choose one form over the other may on some occasions coincide with the new language, and sometimes not. The grammar of a language is not perfect, partly because of its evolution and history of influences as it has developed over the years. There are many exceptions and special cases, even for or especially because of familiar structures, such as in irregular verbs, and some determiners like articles and quantifiers. Those familiar, commonly used aspects often have a tendency to evolve and change faster, hence becoming more irregular. Grammar can be misleading in that when a generation comes across it, it seems that many or even all the rules are written in stone. Yet it is organic and constantly changing. How it is used with many subtle nuances can change noticeably in a few generations. We think those rules of grammar are absolute, but they are not. They may be regarded as absolute in that region and at that time in history, but they are apt to change later on. Grammar is more than learning the rules of construction and when to apply them, though. Every language is structured in different ways, and over its long evolution, some ideas gain importance and nuances that perhaps other languages don't appreciate or find relevant to the users in their situation. Becoming more precise in understanding and application of a language's grammar can be useful, but it is also relevant and important to develop a feel for the language. The two aren't at odds with one another, and often fluency and accuracy can work hand in hand, although sometimes specific activities focusing on one or the other can be very useful. This brings us to what the goals in the teaching of grammar could be. As teachers, we realize that there are many components to teaching, and grammar is but one of them. It is important, so when we set our sights on teaching good grammar, what are our objectives? What can we do to realistically help our students grow in their understanding and use of the grammar in the language that they are studying? I say realistically because as good as our intentions are, many students don't seem to catch on as easily or as deeply as we would like. In this article, I would like to explore a little some of those approaches that can help us reach the goal of helping the students learn and use the grammar of a language reasonably well. Your goal as a teacher isn't to have all your students understand and use the grammar perfectly, although that is the approach we often take and strive for. As mentioned earlier, grammar is a complex set of systems with a long underlying history of evolution and elements of culturally based logic which may not be completely appreciated logically or intellectually. Native speakers can reach a high level of accuracy and fluency without being able to analyze why they do the things they do. Appreciating that can affect how you approach your teaching and the students' learning. For example, having the students associate using certain structures with particular situations often is very effective. They may not be able to articulate why they use those structures in those circumstances, but they have grown accustomed to doing so. There are different teaching approaches and methods, and most, if not all of them, do have a number of elements that indicate that there are benefits to exploring the language in those ways. Certain teachers, and certainly some students, can more easily relate to some approaches better than others. That is why I personally prefer a more eclectic approach, which is flexible regarding the student's interests and abilities and the situation I am in. I've also seen very good teachers in action who adopt approaches other than what is currently encouraged, even perhaps specializing in that specific methodology. While it is true that different methodologies have some advantages and drawbacks, much depends on how the teacher is and the situation everyone is in. While it is quite a challenge to attempt to list the best ways of teaching, I have found some factors to be prevalent. They apply to the goals of teaching grammar well, and also to elements not directly pertaining to a grammar focus. Perhaps some of them might be interesting for you to consider or keep in mind, and perhaps you have already developed your own on this matter. I'd like to list what I consider to be very important factors to be included when thinking about and planning your classes. Here they are. Section B. Factors to consider when lesson planning and being in the classroom teaching. All people learn in different ways, and there can be much variance in tendencies among students in any one group, such as in a class. Cultural and common expectations can mix in with those individual differences, making learning and teaching a challenge, especially when you have a class composed of students from different backgrounds and interests. Learning is a very dynamic process and can elude specific attempts to identify such constructs as level or progress. It is also not a very linear process, although there are elements that appear to have some typical ordering. This means that it can be very beneficial to both teachers and students to perceive and approach learning in a multitude of ways. For example, even though some teachers and learners develop a fondness for following a particular progression of stages, such as presentation, practice, production, BPP, or ESA, engage, study, activate, it can often be very helpful to go back a stage or step or two after the students have some experience using the language, and we look at some of the fundamental ideas behind it. Or to jump ahead a stage or step or two to get a glimpse of what is coming and allow that to influence how they may direct themselves. There are stages in one's understanding of individual elements and of grammar as a whole. This also applies to one's various skill sets, as mastering them develop in specific areas and in general. However, these stages don't necessarily reflect linear learning, and often defy boundaries as they can overlap or resist strict definition, such as when people can sometimes appear to leap ahead a stage or two much faster and more profoundly than prevailing expectations would tell us. And of course, their awareness, abilities, and skills in other languages can influence that as well. Exposure and familiarity with the structures in both input, videos, readings, listenings, and practicing applying them strongly influence a learner's appreciation of their usage. Exposure and familiarity also strongly aids the development of that learner's usage of those structures if encouraged to apply them in a variety and number of settings. Learners react well to constructive feedback. This includes enabling the learners to more efficiently evaluate their own progress and develop their own goals in a realistic manner. The teachers can incorporate this type of guidance and direction into their teaching to increase the learner's effective understanding and use of the language, as well as strengthening the student's sense of well-being as a user of that new language. Provide clear references, not only for your explanations or explanations you guide your students into making. They are references that the students can look back to in their own time when they are not in your class, and also in future classes. Those references can be an important element in helping the students understand fundamentals, as well as relationships between parts of their language. And those references can help give them direction and confidence as they develop their own usage of that language area. References can be a handy table nicely laid out, but they can also be experiences to look back on, or concrete objects that could be seen or interpreted in certain ways. Think of those references as guides students can fall back on when exploring their use of the language. Eventually, you would hope that the students internalize those references in such a way that they develop a feel for the proper paths to follow. Much of the video on teaching grammar, found in the YouTube channel MEC English Teaching, Sit 2-4 Teaching Grammar, is dedicated to providing an example on how references might be done. In my experience, the provision of a reference can often be immensely helpful when clarifying direction and expectations, and when increasing understanding and student autonomy. It can also be highly useful when the teacher wishes to correct or prompt the students. When this reference is used frequently in a variety of activities, many of the key points begin to be better appreciated by the students. The following is one such reference, providing a list of suggested steps students can follow when attempting to create questions. This list of steps is not intended for continuous or perfect forms of verb tenses, for example, but can be easily modified to apply to them as well. This reference should be associated with the teacher having the students actively use it in various activities, and when the students refer to it, they are also referring to the context in which it was used. I created this reference for you, the teacher, in mind, although it could be given to students at an intermediate level who require some clarification on how to go about making questions. It can serve as a guide and as an example of how you might direct your students. For low levels, this is as far as you go for the moment, because you want to choose examples that follow this approach and not have extra complications. That selection of examples and tasks you introduce in the activities would not include questions of the subject, questions using the verb be, other verb tenses, nor anything else that might complicate the students becoming accustomed to using this approach or sequence of steps. When the students are familiar with it, you may wish to pursue some areas in further detail, such as questions about the subjects, singular versus plural subjects, what happens when we ask a question whose main verb is be, or expanded exploration of possessive adjectives and other details. This reference is quite lengthy and detailed, designed to help students learn a sequence of steps to create WH questions limited to specific situations. It becomes effective when you, the teacher, go through it several times in different activities, so students learn how to apply it, and when the students try to apply it on their own. Obviously, for a very low-level group of students, you would strip the reference down, so all those words and explanations that they wouldn't understand won't interfere with them learning to appreciate how they can approach making questions in a specific application. I've taught many students at an intermediate level who continue to struggle with how to construct questions well, and for them, those added words and explanations were useful. Consider how your students can relate to a reference you may wish to use, and be prepared to modify it when you see how students react to it. I'd like to repeat and emphasize a previous point. Students need frequent exposure and experiences. Lecturing can be good at times, but students need to experience themselves actively applying or attempting to apply some ideas. Repetition of an activity or style can be good over several classes in succession, and can be good as an intermittent reminder in future, more distant classes. However, repetition alone is not sufficient. It is often much more rewarding and effective to make variations of activities and approaches concerning a particular theme. And those variations not only add a wealth of new perspectives for the students, but also go a long way towards strengthening the language area and the confidence the students have in their understanding and usage of it. Section C. Different activities which can repeat fundamental ideas without appearing repetitive. The following are some ideas on the last point of how one can repeat the theme of getting the students better acquainted with a particular grammar focus, but done in different ways, so students can get a fuller understanding. In using the example given in the video MEC English Teaching, Sit 2-4 Teaching Grammar, on how to create questions, a teacher can employ a number of activities over many classes, which can get the students applying those grammar rules. The activities can often build on previous ones, or focus more on a particular aspect or a new twist in applying the grammar references. Here are some activities which review the key points underlying the grammatical function of creating questions. The key points remain the same, but the variety of activities encourages different perspectives and continued practice of the original grammatical structure, and sometimes integration of that structure with other structures or elements of using the language. Ease the students into the new grammar, preparing them for what is to come, so some aspects become familiar. For example, In one class, you could begin by focusing only on WH question words, such as what, where, how many. After they have been elicited or supplied, and their meaning and pronunciation gone over, students could be placed into pairs, so they can quickly quiz each other on them. If both students in one group share a common language other than English, one student can say a question word in their language, and the other has to say it in English. After all the question words have been covered, they can switch roles. When that is done, they can switch roles again, but this time the prompt is in English and the other student has to say it in their language. You can be creative. You can think of other ways to get them understanding and using the question words. Another way would be to put students into small groups and give each group a set of question words and a group of pictures that are directly relevant to those question words. For example, you could have a picture of a person to prompt who, a picture of an object to prompt what and which, a picture of a clock to prompt how long, a picture of a map to prompt how far, a picture of a number of the same things, such as 5 bottles of water, to prompt how many. Think the picture prompts through carefully, so the intended meaning is conveyed clearly and easily. Think of potential problems or concepts difficult to understand, such as the difference between what and which. You could use one image that has a cat on one side and a dog on another, showing a limited choice to elicit which. Tell the students that in their groups they have to match the pictures with the concept. If they have difficulties that they can't easily work out, have them check with other groups to see how they approached the task. In other words, get students helping one another while encouraging a cooperative learning environment. If students in one group split up to seek help from other groups, they can later reband and compare what they have learned. This is a form of using repetition. More ideas. Students are shown how a question can be constructed with some basic limitations. These limitations are deliberately done. There is no need to go into all the possibilities and special cases. Any examples given in the presentation and in the various exercises and activities are specifically selected to reflect those parameters. Later, in future classes, if some new possibilities and considerations need to be explored during that course relative to the student's level and stage of learning, then they can be addressed, and in such a way that they are building on to the student's growing knowledge and understanding. Use those same examples and approach every time you introduce a new activity which may require the students to make questions. You could elicit those examples and approach after the first couple of times. Students could be given a set of prompts to create new questions. They can create those questions in pairs in one class and individually in another class. For the students who find it difficult, the questions could be the same in both classes. And for the students who understand what to do, they could be given different questions for more opportunities to practice. The students could be given a set of questions that are correctly constructed, except the word order needs adjusting for each question. You could also have 2 questions in that set which are in the correct order mixed in with the other ones. The students are informed about that, but they don't know which ones. Weaning the students to become less reliant on aids, such as references or more controlled practice activities, can be very helpful. In the previous example of looking at the word order of questions, one activity could be allowing the students to check a complete reference, either in the form of a handout or on the board or screen. In a later activity, a reference could still be made available, but in abbreviated form, such as only a few simple prompts, like QASV rest. Then, in another activity, no references would be used to accompany the student's efforts in completing the task. Students are given a list of questions with errors to correct, either individually or in small groups. Many of those incorrect questions could be from recent speaking activities those students have engaged in, as well as a conglomeration of mistakes many students at that level make. Students can be supplied with different responses and be asked to create a question for each of them. Underlining or highlighting specific prompts would help define the expectations. For example, my name is Andrea, prompting, what's your name? My name is Andrea, prompting, whose name is Andrea? She lives in Honduras, prompting, where does she live? I live in Honduras, prompting, where do you live? Students can compare how a question in one verb tense, for example, present simple, is similar and different to the same question in another verb tense, for example, past simple. This can also be done for more complex comparisons at higher levels when looking at simple, continuous, and perfect forms. Students are placed into pairs or small groups and use flashcards to help each other with the grammatical structure, such as in making questions. They take turns with who is the teacher in that group for the current flashcard, and who is the student or students for that turn when they attempt to create the question. The teacher has to elicit the desired question from one or all of the other students in that group, and helps and guides with hints when necessary. When the student makes the desired question, she or he becomes the new teacher, and they continue to practice making a new question with the next flashcard. When the student is shown the flashcard by the teacher in that group, they see only the original sentence with the prompt, for example, Sheila eats pizza. The teacher has on his or her flashcard the original sentence the student sees, and the desired question that the student has to make. The teacher also has other prompts for that desired question, so the students have a better idea of what question to make when those prompts are communicated to them. For example, if the student uses the wrong question word, the teacher can point out that another is more appropriate. The teacher holds the card so the students can easily see that prompt for the question, and on the same card facing the teacher is the original sentence repeated, plus the desired answer. For example, on the side of the flashcard which the teacher sees, on the top is written, Sheila eats pizza, and pizza is underlined. Below the original prompt, we have the formula, question word, auxiliary, subject, verb, and the rest. And below that we have, what does Sheila eat? On the other side of that same flashcard, which the students can see, there's only the sentence written, Sheila eats pizza, with the pizza underlined. Students can prepare and seek help as needed when they make a list of questions to be later used when interviewing one or more people in the next activity. The teacher monitors and directs the students, offering not only corrections, but also suggestions. Students can be encouraged to ask at least one additional improvised follow-up question, depending on the other person's response. Those follow-up questions could be to some or all the prepared questions in that interview. You can take notes of where the students are strong and where they are struggling when engaged in a speaking activity where questions are asked. When the activity is finished, you can give a feedback session and elicit how the students can correct those questions. If the students find it difficult, you can supply them with prompts and leading questions to remind them of what they had previously learned and to better understand your expectations. Those are just some possible activities you could employ to get your students more familiar with using those structures. You also want to approach those and other activities with some things in mind. Section D. Developing student interest and exploration. If you can, build up a classroom atmosphere where exploration and interest occur naturally and frequently. This not only contributes to student autonomy, but also to reaching the students better. They feel more personally motivated to understand and use those challenging aspects they are learning, and you want to support and encourage that. There are many ways to promote this development. Here are a few suggestions. Give the students room and opportunity to explore the language and their use of it at their own pace and in their own ways. Deliberately work that idea into your activities when you are planning your lesson. In this way, students have the flexibility and freedom to momentarily step out of the activity to clarify doubts or to explore an idea. It can allow the students to take the time they need and develop better approaches to their learning. Different pairings of students can also expose the students to new or alternative options or considerations. Truly listen to your students and try to incorporate and encourage their suggestions. Be sensitive to their limits and frustrations and consider how you might deal with them in future classes. The students will definitely appreciate this, including seeing and respecting you as you interact with other students who may not be reacting or learning as well or as quickly as hoped. This last point about truly listening to your students can be extended to a more specific application mixed with a new theme. Often, we teachers find ourselves teaching to the class as a whole, and often we make our judgment calls that everything seems to be working smoothly so we can move on to the next step with some confidence. However, just because 3 or 4 actively involved and bright students demonstrate that they are catching on, we sometimes fail to notice that the rest of the class is silent. We can forget that that silence may indicate that there are several students who don't understand as much as those more prolific ones. It's not enough to do comprehension checks to see if the other students are up to par. We should be careful to wrap our asking them to participate in such a way that the students don't feel so threatened, and you are creating a constructive way to approach that difficult area, including developing their confidence. It's not that everyone should always feel comfortable. It's okay to create or encounter situations where the students feel discomfort, vulnerable, or uncertain what to do at times. But when they do feel those things, they have previous experience and strategies, or will soon have them, on how to deal with that. When you ask those students some questions which might potentially put them on the spot and discourage their motivation, be prepared to help them find a way out of their quandary. That could be adding on more leading questions that can tap into some things they do know, or by you making it known to the class that there are some areas which are difficult for many to master, and here are some things we can do about that. And sometime later in that class, you can call upon that same student to answer a new question that would be easier for him or her to respond to. You want your students to become aware of the challenges of what is involved, and constructive ways that they can deal with them, turning those doubts into experiences where they begin to feel more able and confident. When the students find themselves in future quandaries, they can look back on those experiences and perhaps tap into those ways that help them manage themselves through that situation. Provide a variety of activities and approaches so you can reach a greater number of students, and take note on how different individuals relate to them. Strive to keep your activities credible in that they are not time fillers or merely a standard routine approach. Make them meaningful and valuable experiences. This can include the ways you approach presenting yourself while introducing these activities and the themes you want to focus on. Give the students frequent practice activities to build their confidence, skills, and clarity. Challenge them in ways that test their knowledge and proficiency without going too far beyond their limits. Frequently give students feedback on how well they are doing, backed with examples and reasoning, so they can better appreciate your advice and begin to evaluate themselves in a more realistic manner. Always give closure. You can do this by keeping your promises to get back to the students, by giving and going over important highlights of what was done in today's class, by getting students accustomed to your expectations and the different steps they can take to reach them. This could be in how they approach various things such as taking exams, doing homework, carrying out different activities in class, investigating something outside of class, project work, studying, written assignments, even their learning in general. For example, when you assign homework, you can model or elicit from students the first 2 examples of each exercise which you assign in the workbook, or what can be done to get better marks in their writings, or suggestions on how they can approach certain activities. Sometimes your suggestions for one student may be different from what you say to others. Another way to get students accustomed to certain expectations is to give quizzes and mock tests prior to real official evaluations, so students have a clearer idea of what to expect on the exam and how they are evaluated. This isn't merely a teach-to-the-test approach. It's much more. It's showing them the way to understand what is considered better quality and ways they can achieve that. Start introducing activities early enough in the course so the students can appreciate and learn those expectations. Praise your students when they attempt to take on the challenges and recognize the effort they are putting in and some of the progress they are making. Make the activities challenging in such a way that the strongest students and the struggling students all feel they can make some progress, which may mean different things to different students. But make them aware of their progress in their terms. This could include embedded but realistic praise when a student has not yet reached a goal, but has moved in that direction. For example, I see you are still having some difficulties with X in general, but I can see you are doing X1 and X2 much better because... Or, what do you still find difficult? Why don't you try... Smile and be kind to your students, but don't be afraid to let them know early on where they need to work more on and how to go about doing it. Use both fluency focus and accuracy focus activities for all levels. Of course, you can employ one more than the other, depending on what you see as more appropriate, but both should be done. For example, your lower level students may have just covered some basic adjectives of feelings. Adjectives of feelings would be more appropriately placed in the category of teaching vocabulary. However, it is often the case that what we do in the classroom often touches upon several categories and themes simultaneously, or integrates them as we go through a progression of steps or stages. So, in this case, we are both using and integrating the new vocabulary while helping the students to interact better as they ask and respond to questions. As students draw from different items from that new vocabulary list, they can practice further their skills in question-making and spoken interaction. Let's explore this a little further. We want to promote the students' confidence and versatility in making questions. At the same time, we want to integrate this with some new vocabulary in speaking interactions. Here is one set of examples we can try out in successive classes over 4 days. Day 1. Maybe the first day you could get your students in pairs to use yes-no questions. Are you tired? Yes, I am. Are you sleepy? No, I'm not. These interactions are short, but emphasize good accompanying intonation and chunking the question and the answer into groups of spoken words, not individual words. Even on this first day, you could use different approaches while repeating the same basic activity. For example, Step 1. Provide a list of adjectives of emotional feelings and their pronunciation and meaning. Step 2. Show or elicit the basic question and possible answers. Step 3. Create or elicit through leading questions a simple and clear representation of what needs to be done, and use it frequently as a reference. Maybe write that on the board or the screen. Step 4. Have the students repeat the question as a whole with good intonation and pronunciation. Step 5. Ask individual students to ask you the question, using different vocabulary or adjectives of feelings, and you respond. Step 6. Now you ask different individual students questions, and they respond. Step 7. Students in pairs ask each other the questions, model first, and they are allowed to refer to their notes and what is written on the board or screen. Step 8. They do the same thing, but without the written prompts in their notes or on the board or screen. It's okay if they forget a couple of items. Step 9. They stand up, circulate, and when you clap your hands, they have to ask their new partner some questions and respond to their partner's questions. They take turns asking each other and responding. Then after a short time, you tell them to circulate for a few seconds, finding a new partner, and you clap your hands again. So, you can see, there's much repetition going on in the first class. But because of the changing circumstances and approaches, the activity doesn't lose its vitality. And with each new step, the students are slowly becoming accustomed to using the structures. They are also provided with many different opportunities to try the structures out and potentially clarify some background doubts they might be having. Day 2. On the second day, you can reintroduce the structures, eliciting everything from the students as you write down the prompts, the adjectives, on one part of the board or screen, as well as creating that clear reference of how questions and answers can incorporate those adjectives, also displayed on the board or screen. That establishes what the targets are, for the benefit of any students who missed last class, and to remind the returning students. Then, the students engage in an activity or two where they practice that form and the accompanying vocabulary. After that, you could introduce a new twist, showing the new vocabulary of a little and very, quantifiers, adverbs, describing the intensity or amount of the adjectives. This idea of reviewing what was done in a previous class and adding on new elements goes a long way in many considerations. For example, the students are becoming increasingly familiar with the target language and using it. They are repeating past concepts, but also learning something new, so it doesn't feel or appear to be boring or stagnant. Their confidence is growing, and there is ample opportunity to explore and play with the language. This helps prepare them for future situations which are inevitably not the same as their current ones. So their flexibility and adaptability are also growing. It also provides the teacher with several situations to draw from to see how well individual students and the class as a whole are making out. You may wish to include a clear reference on how a little and very can be used. You could write on the board or screen, "I'm feeling a little tired. I'm a little tired. I'm feeling very tired. Very happy, very hungry, very nervous. I'm not feeling nervous at all. I'm not nervous at all. Not nervous at all. Not at all." After you explain the difference of very versus a little, you could write the following reference on the board or screen. Student 1. How are you today? Student 2. I'm tired. Are you a little tired or very tired? I'm very tired. Again, you can have them practice in various ways, such as those suggested in the steps listed on the first day you introduce the adjectives. Now there's a little more to it, a little more grammar, but it's not a very big jump. And as in the previous class, get the students to express their questions and responses in a natural-sounding manner. Day 3. Perhaps as a variation of the activity the following day, you can make an alteration. Student 1. How are you today? Student 2. I'm tired. How tired are you? I'm very tired. This variation is good to get the students accustomed to a wider range of question making and to encourage the students to pursue general answers with further, more detailed follow-up questions. It is also good by serving as one more element to be added to their repertoire when engaging in different situations. Day 4. Then the next day, you can introduce more fully the concept of follow-up questions. Of course, at the low levels, the students would be quite limited in being able to come up with a good range of questions, all reasonably well constructed. So, in order to pursue that area a little further, enough to get the students a little familiar with the concept and what might be involved, you could elicit and provide some possible follow-up questions prior to the main speaking activity. Again, if you want to encourage the idea that there is to be some improvisation, because much depends on what the other person says when responding to the original question, it would seem admissible to allow partial questions and responses that are often not grammatically correct, but do allow for fairly successful communication. The grammar accuracy focus would still be on the original question, and the communication, fluency, improvisation would be on the follow-up question. For example, Student 1. How are you today? Student 2. I'm very tired. Here there's no need for student 1 to ask, "How tired are you?" "Why are you tired?" "Because no sleep." You will not correct these mistakes because you want the students to feel freer and become more familiar with improvising and using the language. If you consider it relevant, you could address a few select points in a later feedback session after the activity. You don't want to pounce on the students with constant corrections when they are just finding their way and attempting to be brave while trying out the language. It would be necessary before the activity to provide a few options like why, because, or other question words like how many, how often, what kind of, because it is very likely the students would need the raw material and the direction in order to carry out the task. Think of the level, what they have learned, and provide just a few examples, perhaps with them practicing them first as a separate, more controlled practice activity before adding it on to exploring follow-up questions to "How are you today?" in a freer exchange. An important idea behind all this is to deliberately plan a variety of activities to be carried out over a series of classes, sometimes building on to what was introduced on previous days. It reminds students of that structure, how and when it can be used, can minimize challenges to students who miss a class or two, and helps them feel more comfortable with actively using it. That growing confidence and familiarity they feel is partly due to having several experiences where they become accustomed to applying strategies and direction when encountering challenging areas, and this most definitely contributes much to their abilities and interest to actively explore using the language. Section E. Some takeaways when planning or executing a class with a grammar focus. Clarify expectations and directions to follow through the use of references, modeling, and repeated exposure and practice with constructive feedback. Involve the students as much as possible in the creation and reminders of those references, in the exploration of the theme, in providing examples and explanations, in reflecting upon and evaluating their progress, and in giving suggestions and perspectives regarding the activities employed. Employ different kinds of references such as tables or graphics, objects, and especially experiences to guide and point out important ideas and relationships. Associate the grammatical concepts and structures with situations to use them in wherever possible. Allow the students to control the pacing and approach to some activities, and even allow them to discover and influence the directions in how they learn. Make a clear presentation of the key points, such as composition, how the structure is constructed, when to apply that structure. Have the students try the structure out in a few activities and look again at its structure and when to apply it. A listing of variations, alternatives, exceptions, choices, and considerations. Don't make it too long, just a few points, and only if they are immediately relevant. This information could be broken down into parts, with one part building onto what was presented and practiced previously. The information should be transmitted to the students in a way in which the students are frequently involved. This includes not lecturing or not only lecturing, elicitation, guided discovery. The students investigate. Students provide examples and explanations. The teacher makes leading questions. Students help other students. Mixed groupings when students approach tasks. This could be individual, pair work, small groups. Students need lots of practice. Many activities done over several or even many classes. This can include occasionally returning to repeat those activities in future classes, after you have moved on to other themes. Students need a variety of activities when they explore and practice the target language, so they have better perspectives and are open to different applications of that language area. See the question-making and adjectives of feelings examples earlier in this article. While much can be said in favor of intense immersion experienced in a single session, I strongly believe repeated exposure and practice developed over many sessions adds considerably to the student's understanding, skills, and confidence. References can be simple or detailed and lengthy. Go through them with your students several times in different activities so they can better appreciate how to use those references effectively. This is especially true for lower levels. Monitor the students in the various parts of your lesson plan and see how effectively the students understand your expectations and carry out the tasks. Maybe some modifications are in order, or you can gain some new insights. While intellectual analysis and explanations have a good place for some students, the students can develop a better feel for the structure by associating it with specific situations. That can be from both input, readings, listenings, and videos, and in activities where they use the structures themselves. Section F. Concluding words. There is no single activity or approach that works well all the time for all the students and all the grammar points to be covered. Much depends on the situation everyone is in, the personality and ways of the teacher, and certainly the makeup of the students in any one class. Many factors can come into play when striving to make your grammar class or portion of the class dedicated to grammar effective and successful. Try to keep your goals clear, with the capacity to see to what extent they are being achieved in the classroom. Also be prepared to modify those goals and the activities and approaches if they are not appropriate to the current situation. Use a variety of credible activities where the students can see the usefulness of why they are carrying out those tasks. Many of those activities build on to previous ones, adding more depth, flexibility, and familiarity. Keep the students involved in all stages and parts of the class. Monitor and listen to all the students individually and collectively. They are constantly showing you ways that you can reach them. I wish you all the best in your teaching of grammar and in everything. If you found this article interesting or helpful in any way, please share it with others and give it a like so that it can get back to me. If you feel inspired to make a comment or ask a question, please do so. And if you subscribe to the video channel, MEC English Teaching, it helps me know the work being done is appreciated and that you can be notified of future videos coming. Till the next time, this is Max.